Hey guys, it's SD, your host of the Life Picks Relationship podcast, where people with all sorts of backgrounds, challenges, and life experience show us how they make their relationship extraordinary. Hey guys, we're here today with Kamini Wood. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
Great. You want to tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. So I am a certified life coach. I work with high achievers on dealing with anxiety and overwhelm that comes with trying to do it all perfectly, fixing things for everybody, worrying about other people's happiness. So it's our responsibility. So I'm dealing with and I'm working with the high achievers who are sort of overwhelmed with this. And how do we manage that stress? And how do we start letting go of being a hostage to those external expectations and validations and become our own resilient self-leader? Because when we don't deal with those things, we end up in these codependent relationships or unhealthy relationships. And we start to see things crumble, whether from an emotional standpoint, a physical standpoint, a work standpoint, a relationship standpoint. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Wow, yeah. So, what's the first step that someone has to do if they realize they're in such a situation?
So the first step in realizing that you are living to these external expectations and validations is, it's when we start to say to ourselves, oh, I should do something or I ought to do something. Those are key indicators that we're actually not living to our authentic self, but we're actually trying to fulfill somebody else's version of us. And the first thing really truly is awareness. Like, we really have to become aware that this is happening, because awareness is that doorway to change, right? And then it's up to us to either step through that doorway or to just recoil and kind of stay in the same rut that we've been in. And what I always tell my clients is the very first thing to do when we're ready to walk that doorway is we really have to start getting familiar with who we are again. So what that means is figuring out, how do we feel? Asking ourselves, how am I feeling right now? And then from there saying, well, what do I need? Because when we start re-identifying with what we're feeling and what we're needing, we're actually honoring who we are. And we're recognizing that whoever we are, that unique person, those unique feelings, whatever it is that we're feeling and needing, are valid. And we don't need some source from the outside to validate those for us. And from that place of recognizing what we're feeling and needing, we can then either self-soothe and figure out ways to address it ourselves, or go and actually lean on our support system or the people that we love and trust, whether it be family members or friends, or sometimes it is a coach. Going and getting vulnerable and saying, this is what I need. Can you help me? Can you help me fulfill these things? And that would be the very first step.
Yeah, and it's being aware. Like you said, the first thing is being self-aware. So being self-aware that I'm choosing to go and lean someone else. I'm not becoming codependent on someone else by doing something. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I also really liked what you said about this is what I should do. It's that question of asking, if you find yourself thinking, this is how I should be. It's a really concrete, easy way for a person to realize that they're in not such a good place at that exact second.
Yeah, in that moment, they are living externally. They are
Yeah.
living to whatever some external force is telling them is good or bad. And I mean, and that's a whole nother topic on and of itself, is what makes something good and bad. Really, truly, it's our thoughts about it, right? Our thoughts create whether something is good or bad. But even more so when we're living in the shoulds or ought tos, we're now letting somebody else define good and bad for us, or right and wrong for us, and
Yeah, so
giving
it
away our
starts, we have
power.
to decide for ourselves what's good or bad, right?
Yes.
Now, how
Yes.
do we decide that?
Well, that's when we have to recognize that it's our thoughts that are going to determine if something works for us or not for us, right? And so, and recognizing that it's okay for me to think something is good, and for instance, you to say, well, no, that doesn't work for me. And that's perfectly fine. A lot of times when we are living to these external expectations and the validations of something outside of us, we are afraid to speak up and say, well, I actually like whatever it is. And even because, like, for instance, our friend or our partner says that they don't like it, we think, oh, well, then I can't like it either. And so really, truly, it's coming to terms with the fact that if something works for us, and if we always go back to our core gifts and our core values, and they're in line with those things, then we know that that thing works for us and it's okay. It's when we don't pay attention to those core gifts and core values and we stray from them that we would know, oh, maybe this isn't the right thing. And it's coming to terms with the fact that, like I said before, something might work for me and not work for my partner or my friend or even my child, for instance, as a parent. What works for us doesn't necessarily work for our children.
Yeah. So what should one do if one is in a relationship? They want something, they believe something, but they're not really being authentic because of their spouse.
Yeah, so this is when it's really important to get really in tuned with what you're feeling and what you're needing, and then go and learn it's known as nonviolent communication. But what it really is the formula is recognizing, what it is that you're feeling, like when you feel it, what it is that you're feeling, what it is that you need, and then communicating to your partner from a very loving perspective of, when X happens, this is how I feel. I would need Y to occur instead. Then it puts it on your partner to either honor that request or communicate to you and say, I can't meet that request, but this is what I can do. Or conversely, they have the option and choice, all right? We're all in charge of our own choice points to say, I just can't do that. And then it's back to you where you get to then make a choice and say, well, I really need my partner to do, to help me with X or, do Y. And if they can't, then this isn't a healthy place for me, right? So it really allows both individuals to honor what it is that they can do, are willing to do, what requests they can meet. And that's where we know that we're being interdependent rather than codependent.
Yeah.
It's when we bend ourselves inside out to meet whatever our partner needs without any acknowledgement for our own needs and wants. And that's when codependent.
Yeah. So that way they're both in a healthy place and a healthy position. So ultimately the relationship will be really healthy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first step to getting to be aware? Because so many people speak about being self-aware. How do they get to actually being self-aware?
It's a very interesting question, because it's, each of us is we react to things in a different way. I would say that the first step in becoming self-aware is really, it goes back to what I said before, which is identifying, what do I feel? Just because so many times we are going through all the things in life, right? We're doing the things, we're doing the tasks, we're trying to get everything done, especially high achievers, right? It's like they accomplish one thing and they're going to the next thing. You have to slow down and get present in the moment rather than living in the future or living in the past. So get present in the way that I get present. I mean, some people will say, oh, well, I meditate, and other times people use breathing techniques. For me personally, the quickest way to get present is to zone into my 5 senses and figure out, what am I currently hearing? What am I seeing? What can I touch? What do I smell? What's the taste of my mouth? Really getting in touch with those 5 senses. It slows the brain down. And so all the monkey mind thoughts sort of, they settle, and you're able to be present in the moment, and then really understanding, inside of me, like, because our physical body holds a lot, from a somatic level, holds a lot of emotion. Like, we feel things physically. So getting in tuned with that, right? And really understanding, what do I feel? That is the very first step in becoming self-aware. And then from that self-awareness, learning the practice of things like self-compassion and self-love and filling your cup up. And I know it's almost cliche at this point, and people always say, oh, you put your own oxygen mask on first before putting on the other person's. There is so much truth to that statement, though. If you don't take care of yourself and you're coming from an empty place, and you either are expecting somebody else to complete you or fill you up, that's unhealthy, right? Because that's how we become codependent. Or conversely, we're just running on empty. I mean, how far can your car go with no gasoline in the tank? We're the same way. If we don't fill ourselves up, eventually it just shuts down.
Yeah. I really like that 5 senses thing, because so many times people say, you're self-aware, stop, or journal, or meditate, but you're in the middle of the situation. What could you do this split second? Yeah. Just like focus your mind on how you're feeling. What it is, your body sensations really gets you to the present. Okay, so I'm just going to continue going through the process for people. So someone becomes self-aware, gets signals from their body, and they're now in a current situation where they realize something's off. Like, let's say they need sleep, but they can't right now get to bed. What do you suggest to such a person?
So what really is helpful, and I encourage my clients to do this, is to actually create a list of ways that they can practice self-love or self-care. So if they have like this go-to list, for instance. So if you're in the moment, and for instance, like I have that problem routinely where I'm trying to fall asleep and I can't. And so there are certain things that I do in order for my own self-care. And one of them is simply just picking up a very, a gentle book to read, like not necessarily a self-help book, but just a book with maybe affirmations, or a book that some people just love reading novels and nonfiction, and it makes them quiet down. And so it's having that go-to list of things that can help us in terms of just giving ourselves that peace and calm, which I equate to self-care. While we're in this pandemic, for instance, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I'll go get my nails done, or I'll go get my hair done. That's how I do self-care. Well, we can't do that right now. So it's always important to keep a list of things that you can do at, midnight, right? So if we keep that in mind and we remember, what can I do for myself when I'm at home? I can't go anywhere. What are ways that I can take care of myself? Maybe it is to go take a warm, hot shower or something. Maybe it is to go draw a bath. So what? It's midnight. If you can't sleep, go ahead and draw yourself a bath if that makes you feel better.
Yeah, exactly. Calm your mind and body also. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea, because so many times when we're in the stressful, overwhelming situation, we don't really have the brain power to think of things to take care of our body, mind, and soul. So having a list that we can always go back to is fantastic. Now, what if someone's in a codependent relationship? What could they do to help the relationship?
Yeah, that's a really awesome question, because it's not like a snap of the fingers. And I mean, when you're in a codependent situation, it takes shifts, right? It takes shifts on both sides. The very first step, as we talked about before, is becoming aware of it. And then it's starting to set boundaries. It really comes down to boundary setting, recognizing what I'm willing to do, or what can I do, and what do I need my partner to be in charge of, so to speak, and then communicating those boundaries. And that's not to say that it's super smooth, right? Because if we've been showing up in a certain way in our relationship, it causes waves, right? When we change, it causes waves around us, because people are reacting to that. And they're like, well, that's not how you've been. And it's being very loving and communicative in the process, and saying, well, I'm realizing that doing it this way isn't healthy for me from an emotional standpoint, or what have you. And again, this is communication in the most loving way that we possibly can. And it's not a you do this and that makes me behave this way, because as soon as we start communicating with the yous, the other person gets defensive and they feel like they have to justify or argue or defend their position. So it's really making it about what you need and communicating it to your partner, and setting the boundaries and recognizing that it's okay to say no. And part of it is learning self-forgiveness. Like, you're not going to make other people happy all the time, nor is it your job. You can contribute to somebody's happiness, but you're not responsible for their happiness. And when we can really anchor into that distinction, we know that if we are communicating to somebody in an unloving way and they're unhappy, then sure, we play a part in it. But if we're being communicative in a loving manner and they receive it and they're not happy, we have to recognize that that's on them. So part of getting out of that codependency is letting go of owning the other person's feeling, letting them be in charge of how they respond, letting them be in charge of their choices, letting them be in charge of their happiness, and us managing our own, right? This is my business and that's their business. We can be interdependent, but we don't need to be codependent.
Yeah, I once heard a really good line that went something like, if someone's in a codependent relationship, as soon as they get over the guilt of setting the boundaries and stopping to do all the things they used to do, the other person could also accept the new reality and start changing. Awesome.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share with us?
I go back to my basic anchoring thought, which is always that life is a journey that is happening through us and for us, not to us. And so when we are in relationships and things are, icky, or it's just not working, yeah, it can feel awful. But we have to remember that the things that we're going through in life are teaching us things. And if we can anchor into that, it does help move us forward. And it is all about one step at a time, right? Just keep moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your concrete tools that we could start implementing in our lives today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and subscribe to the podcast. Leave a comment below so I can know what you think. And to book your relationship photo shoot, CJ session, or just to hear more about what we do, go to lifepicksrelationships.as.me. I'm waiting.